I walked into that mansion with only $23 to my name, thinking I'd just be cleaning floors and dusting shelves. But when I saw that wealthy woman raise her hand to slap a pregnant maid across the face, something inside me broke. Everyone else turned away. I didn't. That single moment of courage changed everything and almost destroyed my life. But before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you something important. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you're here, please hit that subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Your support means the world to us. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, because what happened in that mansion will stay with me forever. You know that feeling when you're so broke that you start doing math in your head at the grocery store? When you put back the bread because you need that money for the bus fare. That was me 6 months ago. My name is Sarah, and I'm 25 years old. I'm not special. I'm just an ordinary person who was trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to knock me down. I used to work at a small bookstore downtown. I loved that job. The smell of coffee and old paper, the quiet afternoons organizing shelves, the regular customers who knew me by name. It wasn't much money, but it was honest work and it made me happy. Then one morning, I showed up and found a note on the door. The store was closing. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. Just a piece of paper that said my entire life was about to change. For 2 months, I applied to every job I could find. Coffee shops, retail stores, restaurants. But the city is expensive, and jobs are hard to come by. My savings disappeared. My rent was overdue. I remember sitting on my apartment floor one night, staring at my phone screen showing a bank balance of $23.16. I was scared. Really scared. That's when I saw the advertisement. A private employment agency was looking for household staff for wealthy families in the hills outside the city. The ad said the pay was excellent. I didn't have many options left, so I applied that same night. 2 days later, a woman with a professional voice called me. She said they had a position at the Thornton residence. Could I come for an interview tomorrow morning? I said yes before I even knew what I was agreeing to. The next day, I put on my only good dress and took 2 buses to reach the address they gave me. As we drove into the hills, the houses got bigger and the streets got quieter. When I finally arrived, I just stood there with my mouth open. This wasn't a house. This was a palace. The Thornton estate sat behind tall iron gates with security cameras everywhere. The driveway was longer than my entire street back home. There were gardens that looked like they belonged in magazines, and a fountain in front that sparkled in the sunlight. The mansion itself was 3 stories of white stone and glass windows that reflected the sky. A man named Robert met me at the door. He was the head of staff, older with silver hair and a suit that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe. He took me through hallways lined with paintings and rooms filled with furniture that probably cost more than I'd earn in my lifetime. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. The interview was strange. Robert didn't ask me much about my experience. Instead, he talked about rules. Never speak unless you're spoken to. Never look directly at Mr. Thornton or his fiancée unless they address you first. Stay invisible. Move quietly. Do your work and disappear. He kept using that word. Invisible. Then he told me the salary, and I almost stopped breathing. It was 4 times what I made at the bookstore. 4 times. For cleaning and basic housework. I should have asked why. I should have wondered what kind of place pays that much money just to dust furniture and wash floors. But I was desperate, and desperate people don't ask questions. Robert leaned closer and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Miss Victoria can be difficult. If you want to keep this job, you'll learn to stay out of her way and never, ever upset her." The way he said her name, there was fear in his voice. But I needed the money too badly to care. I started the next day. Another staff member named Grace showed me around. She was kind, in her 50s with tired eyes that had seen too much. As we walked through endless rooms, she pointed out what needed cleaning, where supplies were kept, which areas were forbidden. The mansion had 28 bedrooms. Most of them were never used. It felt like a museum, beautiful and empty and sad. During lunch break, Grace pulled me aside in the staff kitchen. "Listen carefully," she whispered, even though we were alone. "Keep your head down around Miss Victoria. Don't look at her too long. Don't speak unless she asks you a question directly. And if she gets angry, just apologize and leave as quickly as you can." I asked her why, and her expression darkened. "She's gotten 4 staff members fired in the last 2 months. One woman lost her job because she coughed while cleaning Miss Victoria's sitting room. That afternoon, I met James Thornton for the first time. He was 34 years old and owned a technology company that I'd seen on the news. He walked past me in the hallway, talking on his phone about investments and quarterly reports. He was handsome in that sharp, expensive way. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect cold expression. He looked right through me like I wasn't even there. Then I saw her. Victoria Sterling. She came down the main staircase wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car used to be worth before it broke down. Her dark hair was styled perfectly, and jewelry sparkled at her neck and wrists. She was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that makes you feel small just by looking at it. But when our eyes accidentally met, something changed in her face. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes went hard and cold, like I'd insulted her just by existing. She looked at me the way you'd look at garbage on the sidewalk, then turned away and called for Robert. I heard her complaining that there were too many new faces in her home. That's when I understood. The high salary, the rules about being invisible, the fear in everyone's eyes. I'd just walked into something dark. My third day at the Thornton estate, I learned what Grace had been trying to warn me about. I was polishing silverware in the formal dining room when I heard screaming. Not the kind of scream that comes from surprise or fear. This was pure rage, the sound of someone who enjoyed their own anger. I followed the sound down the hallway and found Victoria standing over a young staff member named Lisa. Lisa was on her hands and knees, picking up pieces of a broken vase. She was maybe 19 years old, and tears were streaming down her face. Victoria was standing above her, screaming about how stupid she was, how worthless, how she couldn't do anything right. The words coming out of that beautiful mouth were ugly and cruel. Then Victoria grabbed another vase from a nearby table and threw it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Clean it up," she hissed, and stood there watching with a small, satisfied smile while Lisa scrambled to pick up the glass with shaking hands. I stood frozen in the doorway. Where was James? Where was Robert? Why wasn't anyone stopping this? But as I looked around, I saw other staff members walking past quickly, heads down, pretending they saw nothing. That's when I understood the real rule of this house. You survive by looking away. That evening, Grace explained everything to me. Victoria came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations. James's family had built their fortune more recently through technology. There was a massive business deal happening between the two families, and this marriage was the final piece. It wasn't about love. It was about power and money and maintaining their positions in society. "He doesn't love her," Grace whispered. "And I don't think she loves him either. But neither of them will walk away because too much is at stake." I asked why James let Victoria treat everyone so terribly. Grace just shrugged. "He's never around when it happens. And when he is, he just walks into another room. I think he's so focused on his business deals that he doesn't want to see what's happening in his own home." For 2 weeks, I kept my head down. I learned which rooms Victoria liked to use and made sure I cleaned them when she was gone. I learned to recognize the sound of her footsteps and disappear before she arrived. I learned to be invisible, just like Robert had told me. The money was changing my life. I paid my rent. I bought groceries without counting pennies. I even started saving a little bit each week. I told myself I could live with this. I could survive by looking away, just like everyone else. But then came the day that changed everything. I was cleaning the second-floor hallway, wiping down the wooden railings when I heard shouting from James's office. The door was slightly open, and I could see inside. Victoria was standing in the middle of the room, her face twisted with fury. In front of her stood Maria, a sweet woman in her late 30s who had worked for the Thornton family for 6 years. Maria was 7 months pregnant. Her belly was round and visible beneath her uniform. Victoria was holding a leather handbag, and there was a dark stain spreading across it. Maria was apologizing over and over, explaining that she'd accidentally bumped into a side table and knocked over a cup of tea. "You clumsy, worthless piece of trash," Victoria snarled. "This bag costs more than you make in half a year. How dare you ruin it?" Maria's eyes were filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Miss Victoria. I'll pay for it. I'll work extra hours. You think your pathetic salary could cover this?" Victoria's voice got louder. "You're nothing. You're just a stupid cow who can't even walk through a room without destroying things." Then it happened. Victoria raised her hand and slapped Maria hard across the face. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. Maria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, the other hand instinctively protecting her pregnant belly. Everything inside me went still. I saw Maria's terrified face. I saw Victoria's hand raising again, ready to strike a second time. I saw every staff member who had learned to look away, to stay silent, to protect themselves by sacrificing others. And I thought of my mother who worked as a cleaner her whole life, who came home exhausted every night but never complained, who taught me that your job doesn't define your worth, and that dignity means standing up when it's hard, not just when it's easy. Stop. The word came out of my mouth before I could think. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Victoria spun around, and her eyes went wide with genuine shock. I don't think anyone had ever interrupted her before. Stop, I said again, my voice stronger now even though my legs were shaking. She's pregnant. You could hurt the baby. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Maria stared at me with this expression of horror and gratitude mixed together. Victoria's face went through several emotions in quick succession. Shock, confusion, and then pure, burning rage. Who do you think you are? Victoria's voice was deadly quiet now, which somehow felt worse than the screaming. How dare you speak to me? How dare you interfere? My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might fall down, but I moved toward Maria and gently helped her to her feet. Are you okay? I asked softly. Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. You're fired. Do you hear me? Pack your things and get out of my house right now. It's not your house. The new voice came from the doorway, and we all turned. James Thornton stood there in his expensive suit, his expression unreadable. How long had he been standing there? How much had he seen? For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. James stood in the doorway of his office, looking at the scene in front of him. Victoria with her hand still raised. Maria with tears on her face and her hand protecting her pregnant belly. And me, standing between them like I had any right to be there. Victoria's anger flickered, and I saw something else cross her face. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. James, darling, she said, and her voice suddenly sounded different. Softer. More controlled. This maid was being completely inappropriate. I was simply disciplining her for ruining my... I saw what you did, James interrupted. His voice was cold and controlled in a way that made the room feel even smaller. I saw you hit her. He looked at Maria. Are you hurt? Maria shook her head quickly, probably too afraid to speak. Her hand was still pressed against her cheek, where the red mark was starting to show. Then James turned his gaze to me, and I met his eyes for the first time since I'd started working there. What's your name? Sarah, I managed to say, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. Sarah isn't fired, he said, still looking at me. Neither is Maria. Maria has been with this family for 6 years and has never given us any reason to let her go. He finally turned to Victoria. One stain bag is not worth someone's job, and it's certainly not a reason to hit a pregnant woman. Then he said something I'll never forget. He looked directly at me and said, Someone needs to have courage in this house. Victoria's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth to argue, but James had already turned and walked away, leaving us standing there in the heavy silence. After a long moment, Victoria grabbed her stained bag and stormed out of the room. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was like gunshots, each step filled with rage. I helped Maria to the staff room and got her some water. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Why did you do that? She whispered. You should have just looked away like everyone else. Now she's going to make your life miserable. I didn't have a good answer except the truth. Because it was wrong. Word spread through the mansion like wildfire. The new maid had stood up to Victoria. Some of the staff thanked me quietly when no one else was around, their gratitude whispered in empty hallways. Others started avoiding me, afraid that being near me would make them targets too. Grace pulled me aside that evening. What you did was brave, she said. But Victoria never forgets, and she never forgives. Watch your back. She was right. The revenge started small. My cleaning supplies would disappear. My work schedule would mysteriously change, giving me the worst jobs in the house. I'd organize a closet and come back the next day to find everything thrown around. Once, I discovered that someone had poured bleach all over a load of expensive linens I'd just washed, ruining them completely. There was a note in my locker blaming me for the damage. But something else strange was happening too. James started appearing more often when I was working. At first, I thought I was imagining it, But then I'd be cleaning the library, and he'd walk in. I'd be dusting the conservatory, and he'd stop to make a phone call nearby. It felt deliberate. One afternoon, I was washing windows in the sunroom when he walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Why did you do it? You knew Victoria would try to have you fired." I turned to face him, still holding my cleaning cloth. "Because someone had to. Maria is carrying a baby. What Victoria did was cruel and dangerous." He studied me with those dark eyes. "Most people in your position would have looked away. It's safer." "I'm not most people," I said. "And safe isn't always the same as right." He almost smiled. "Almost. No, I'm starting to see that." Then he asked me about myself. Where I was from. What I did before this job. What I wanted to do with my life. It was surreal, standing there in my cleaning uniform, having a real conversation with someone like James Thornton. Like I was a real person to him, not just part of the furniture. I told him about the bookstore. About loving to read and wanting to maybe teach someday. About losing my job and needing this position to survive. He listened in a way that felt genuine, like my words actually mattered to him. For just a moment, I saw something human behind that cold, perfect exterior. Something real and maybe even kind. But then I reminded myself of reality. He was engaged to Victoria. He was a billionaire who owned half the tech companies in the city. I was just a maid who'd caused trouble. This wasn't some fairy tale where the prince falls for the poor girl. This was real life, and real life doesn't work that way. Still, something had shifted between us. I felt it, and I think he did too. Victoria noticed. Of course she noticed. And that's when things got truly dangerous. 3 weeks after the incident with Maria, Victoria called a house meeting. All the staff were summoned to the grand entrance hall. This never happened unless something serious was going on. We all stood there nervously while Victoria positioned herself on the main staircase, like a queen addressing her subjects. "There's a thief in this house," she announced, her voice carrying through the hall. Her eyes scanned the crowd of staff members and landed directly on me. "My diamond necklace is missing. It's worth $75,000, and it was in my jewelry box this morning. Now it's gone." My stomach dropped. I saw exactly where this was going. "I want every staff room searched," Victoria continued, and now there was a slight smile on her face. "Starting with the newest employees." Robert looked uncomfortable but nodded. We were all sent to our rooms while they conducted the search. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, knowing what they were going to find. Knowing I'd been set up. 20 minutes later, Robert appeared at my door. His face was grave, and behind him stood Victoria with a triumphant expression. "We found it," Robert said quietly. "In your dresser drawer." "No," I said, standing up so fast that my chair fell over. "No, that's impossible. I didn't take it. I've never even been in her room." But Victoria was already there, pushing past Robert, holding up a glittering diamond necklace. The stones caught the light and sparkled like ice. "Call the police," she demanded. "I want her arrested for theft." I felt like the world was tilting sideways. This couldn't be happening. I'd never stolen anything in my entire life. "Someone put it there," I said, hearing my voice break. "I didn't do this. You have to believe me." "Of course you'd say that," Victoria sneered. "James, call the police now. I want this thief out of my house and in jail where she belongs." But James was standing in the hallway with his arms crossed, watching everything with a calculating expression I couldn't read. "Everyone in the main hall," he said. "Right now." We all filed back into the grand entrance hall. The tension was suffocating. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Victoria stood beside James, looking victorious. I stood with the other staff members, trying not to cry, knowing my entire life was about to fall apart over something I didn't do. Then Lisa stepped forward. She was the young girl who'd been on her knees picking up broken glass on my third day. She was shaking so hard I could see it from across the room, but she moved into the center of the hall where everyone could see her. "I saw Miss Victoria go into Sarah's room this morning," Lisa said, her voice trembling but clear. "She was carrying something small. I saw her through the door when I was cleaning the hallway." The hall went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Victoria's face went pale. "That's a lie," she said, but her voice wasn't as confident anymore. "She's covering for her friend." But Lisa's courage had broken something open. Another maid stepped forward, a woman named Beth who I'd barely spoken to. "Miss Victoria threw hot coffee on my hand last month," Beth said. "She told me I'd be fired if I told anyone. I still have the scar." Then Robert, The head of staff who'd interviewed me on my first day stepped forward. He looked older than ever, tired and sad. "I've been keeping records," he admitted. "Written documentation of incidents going back almost a year. I was afraid someone would get seriously hurt, and I wanted evidence in case." He trailed off, but we all understood. One by one, staff members started speaking up. Years of cruelty came pouring out. Stories of verbal abuse, destroyed belongings, unfair firings, physical intimidation. Grace spoke about being called worthless. Lisa talked about the broken vases and how she'd had to pay for them from her own salary. Even Ben, the quiet gardener, shared how Victoria had destroyed his tools and blamed him for being careless. It was like a dam breaking. All the fear and silence that had kept everyone trapped suddenly couldn't hold anymore. James's expression grew darker with each story. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. He turned to Victoria, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "The engagement is off." Victoria's triumphant expression crumbled. "You can't be serious. These are just servants, James. They're lying because she convinced them to." "Get out," James said. "My family will destroy you." Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. "The business deal will fall apart. You'll lose millions. Your company's stock will drop. You'll lose everything." James stepped closer to her, and his voice was like ice. "Then I'll lose everything. I won't marry someone who treats people like this. I won't build my life with someone capable of this kind of cruelty." Victoria's beautiful mask finally shattered completely. She screamed. She threw the necklace across the room. She called James every horrible name she could think of. She knocked over a vase, shoved a chair, showed everyone exactly who she really was beneath that perfect exterior. Security had to escort her out while she was still screaming threats about lawsuits and ruined reputations. The massive front door closed behind her, and the entire mansion seemed to breathe out. Several staff members were crying. Maria came over and hugged me tightly, her pregnant belly pressed between us. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave when the rest of us were too scared." That evening, I sat in my small room, trying to process everything that had happened. There was a knock on my door, and when I opened it, James was standing there. Not in his usual suit, but in jeans and a simple shirt. He looked more human than I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have seen what was happening in my own home. I should have stopped it long before you had to." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "You lost your job at a bookstore," he said. "You wanted to maybe teach someday. Is that still what you want?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I just wanted to help people. To make some kind of difference." He smiled, and it was a real smile this time. Warm and genuine. "You already did. You made more of a difference in 3 weeks than I've made in years." Over the next few days, everything changed. Victoria's things were packed up and removed. The atmosphere in the mansion transformed. There was laughter in the hallways now. Staff members talked openly instead of whispering. James was around more, learning everyone's names, asking about their families, treating us like human beings instead of invisible servants. He started making changes. Better wages. Fair schedules. Respect built into every policy. The mansion stopped feeling like a cold museum and started feeling like a home. 3 months passed, and the Thornton estate became a completely different place. The fear that had hung in the air like smoke was gone. People smiled. They joked with each other. The mansion felt warm for the first time since I'd arrived. James canceled the business deal with Victoria's family. I heard it cost him a lot of money, but he found other partners. More importantly, he found himself. He became present in his own life, in his own home. He'd stop and talk with the gardeners about their families. He'd ask Grace about her grandchildren. He remembered everyone's birthday. One evening, I was in the library. It had become my favorite room in the whole mansion. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with thousands of books, big windows that let in the sunset light, and a quiet peace that reminded me of the bookstore I used to love. I was dusting the shelves, humming softly to myself, when James walked in. "Sarah," he said, and I turned around. "I have a question for you." "Yes, sir?" He smiled. "I wish you'd stop calling me sir. We've been through too much for that." He took a breath. "Would you have dinner with me? Not as your employer. Just as two people who'd like to get to know each other better." I stared at him, my heart suddenly beating fast. "James, I'm still the maid. People would talk. Your business associates would." "You were never just the maid," he interrupted gently. "Not from the moment you stood up to Victoria. You showed me what real courage looks like. You changed this house. You changed me. He stepped closer. I don't care what people say. I care about what's right. And getting to know you better feels right. I thought about it. Thought about all the risks. Thought about how different our lives were. How different our worlds were. But then I thought about what my mother always told me, that your worth isn't measured by your job or your bank account. It's measured by your character, your kindness, your courage. Okay, I said. Yes. His smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Last week, Maria had her baby. A healthy little girl with dark hair and the loudest cry I've ever heard. The staff threw a celebration in the garden, with cake and decorations and genuine happiness. James came, and I watched him hold that tiny baby with such gentleness, such care. He looked at Maria and said, "Take all the time you need. Your job will be waiting when you're ready, and we'll work around your schedule." Maria cried happy tears and hugged him. Standing there in the garden, watching everyone celebrate, I thought about that morning 6 months ago when I'd sat on my apartment floor with $23 in my bank account. I thought about how desperate and scared I'd been. I thought about taking this job just to survive. I never imagined that standing up for what was right would lead to all of this. That one moment of courage would change so many lives. Because it wasn't just about me and James. It was about Lisa, who now walks with her head up instead of looking at the floor. It was about Beth, who no longer hides the scar on her hand. It was about Grace, who smiles more now. It was about Maria and her beautiful baby girl, who'll grow up in a world where her mother is treated with respect. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. That the scared, broke girl who took this job just to pay rent somehow found the courage to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. But here's what I learned. Courage isn't about not being afraid. Courage is about doing what's right even when your voice shakes and your knees feel weak. It's about standing up when staying quiet would be easier. It's about choosing compassion over comfort. That day when I stepped into James's office and told Victoria to stop, my hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. Every instinct told me to look away, to stay safe, to protect myself. But I couldn't. Because sometimes there are moments in life when you have to choose between being safe and being good. And being good is always worth the risk. The mansion isn't just a workplace anymore. It's become a home for all of us. A place where people matter, where kindness matters, where everyone is treated with dignity regardless of their job title or bank account. And James? He's not the cold, distant man I met on my first day. He's someone who learned that real success isn't measured in money or business deals. It's measured in how you treat the people around you. In whether you have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you something. Last night, we had dinner together in the conservatory. Just the two of us, talking about books and dreams and the future. He told me he started a program to ensure fair wages and respectful treatment for household staff across the entire city. He said I inspired it. I told him he inspired me too, by choosing to listen, to change, to be better. As I walked back to my room that night, I passed by the main hall where I'd stood 3 months ago, terrified that I was about to lose everything. The place where Lisa had stepped forward, where everyone had finally found their voices. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is to speak up when everyone else is silent. But sometimes that's exactly what changes everything. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll remember this. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. You might be just one person, but one person standing up for what's right can change everything. It changed a mansion. It changed lives. It changed me. And maybe, just maybe, your courage can change the world too.